Salima Ikram, welcome to Inprinciple. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. Really pleasure to have you with us. And Ramadan Kareem to you and everyone around you.
Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you very much. Where to begin with? You are a distinguished professor in Egyptology at the American University in Cairo. And you also worked as an archaeologist. Basically, you studied archaeology and then you did your MSc and PhD in Egyptology. So what I do want to know in the beginning is, what drove you towards this major? I mean, it's very rare that we see someone, with such passion to pursue Egyptology.
Well, yes, indeed. Most people I meet say, oh, I really wanted to be an archaeologist when I was young. And you think, oh, you poor thing, what happened to you? You're a banker or an engineer or something. But I guess some of us just don't grow out of our childhood passions. So I was interested in history when I was a child, and then when I was 8, I had a book about that involved Minoans, and I thought, oh, they're lovely. And then, actually, sorry, when I was 7, and then when I was 8, I got a beautiful book, the Time Life book of Ancient Egypt, and I thought that the ancient Egyptians were very cool. And then I was very fortunate because when I was 9 and a half, we were traveling, so my father, Abba, said, do you want to go to Greece or to Egypt? And I thought, Crete? He said, no, Athens or Cairo. So, of course, Cairo. And I still remember the first time I went into the Great Pyramid. I remember how it smelt, how it looked, how I felt. And then we went to the Egyptian Museum, and I met Rahotep and Nofret, this wonderful pair statue. And I met Tutankhamun, who was also 9. So, obviously we became besties. And I decided at that point that I was going to become an Egyptologist. And my parents thought, oh, this is so nice, she likes history, so they encouraged me, not taking it seriously. And then I went to college. They said, and what will you major in? And I looked at them as if they were completely insane. And I said, I'm going to do archaeology and history, of course. And you should have seen the look on their faces. They were so horrified. So I did that. I had my liberal arts education because I kept reassuring them, with a liberal arts education, you can do anything. So I could become something else, secretly saying, not on your bloody life. And then I went on to do my MPhil and PhD, and I also spent a year studying at the American University in Cairo as a year abroad student. And then I came to live in Egypt. And without a job, without any hope of anything, thinking, oh my God, this is probably the stupidest thing that's ever happened in an academic's career. And then, alhamdulillah, I was very lucky because I did all kinds of things. I wrote for Cairo Today or Egypt Today, as it became later. I did tour guide things, I gave lectures for classes, and then I was hired by the AUC. And on and off, and then I have managed to make a career of it. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, not many people can say they pursued their passion since 9 years old. I'm no one to talk about myself, but
not do I.
So recently, there's a lot of been in the news around Egypt and recent discoveries, and we noticed and read that there's a new city called Aten that has been discovered, which is 3,000 years old and dates back to I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amenhotep III, and it's one of the rare cities that were fully discovered. So just can you talk more about the significance of this discovery and why we see a lot of structures and big structures in Egypt, but we don't really discover a lot of cities?
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question in reverse order. But first I'll say I'm very excited by this find. So the first thing is, why don't we have that many cities? And one of the reasons is because if it was a good place to live in 3000 BC, 2000 BC, 1000 BC, it still is, pretty much. And so you wind up having layers upon layers of habitation in the same place. So when you say or tell something, it's because these places have been inhabited for a very long time. And you can't just say to people, excuse me, move. We want to dig underneath your houses and go and find out about the ancient Egyptians. So one of the reasons why we don't have as many urban sites is because we can't access them. And of course, particularly now with the spread of population, increased population, so more and more places are built up, or more and more places will be agriculture or industry. And then, of course, in the early years of archaeology, what did people want? They wanted monuments, they wanted sculptures, they wanted pretty things. So those are things you find more in tombs and in temples. Most of the stuff in houses is more quotidian, everyday stuff with a few pretty things, but not the kind of lavish wealth that someone's going to pay, a museum's going to pay for you to dig up. So this is why Egyptology and archaeology has been biased towards the grandiose. And that's why we don't have as many cities as we ought to or should, because this way we have lost a huge amount of information about the people who really created all of the things that we go to museums to admire. So this is one of the reasons, because of this scarcity, this new find is even more exciting. I call it Malkata North because it is really an extension or part of the palace complex. And when I talk about palace in ancient Egypt, it's not just a house. It's a whole estate where you would have things, you know, breweries, bakeries, people making textiles, all kinds of things going on, in addition to living quarters for the king and his family, formal receiving places for the king and the court, places for courtiers to live, places for workmen to live. So Malkata was made by Amenhotep III to quite near his mortuary temple on the west bank of Luxor, the modern site of Qom el-Hidan. And this was a huge thing, which had temples, places for chariot racing, a big lake for pleasure as well as practicality, and all the other things I mentioned. And so what Dr. Hawass has found is a part that people didn't really know about. It's far more to the north than the part that's been well explored, and the rest of another part that had been unearthed in the 1930s. And the portion he has found is extraordinary. It is so well preserved, and it also creates many questions. It raises many questions. So you've got a large area that is divided into sectors by these sinusoidal walls, which are these beautiful wavy walls.
Yeah.
And each sector has streets and buildings, and you can walk through them. It's easy. You walk through it, and you think there's an ancient Jew going to come around the corner to meet you. Because the pots and objects lying in these rooms, they've just been abandoned. They're grinding stones. They're places where people were making jewelry, so they're stones. They're amulet makers. It's mind-blowing. And the kind of pottery you see. But it does raise the questions, why do they need so much stuff? As if, oh, off we go, we have to go away now. It's very peculiar, and it's raising a huge number of questions about a site and its development and its abandonment. Also, though, we're learning a lot about technology, because there are all these places of industrial manufacture, which is really cool. And also there are things about it. We've got texts that talk about which year it was made in. We've got bricks that are stamped with Amenhotep III, so we know this is his concoction. And it tells us about technology, daily life, organization of trade and industry, and also hopefully we will learn more about the transitional religious beliefs between the time of Amenhotep III and his son, who is Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, who moved the capital of Egypt to Middle Egypt.
It was
and sort of
it was
a bit.
certainly an interesting period, and this is maybe one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, but since you've brought it up already, so his son transitioned to worshipping one god, right? It turned out to be like no.
People think it's one god, but no. He was not a monotheist. He was probably a henotheist. he put one god before the other gods, and this is a form of the sun god. So what he did was the old god, Amun, Re, he sort of pushed him aside. But a lot of the other deities were still functional, but completely low level. They almost became saints in comparison to the god. And there are two reasons we think for this. One might be that he had a religious revelation, but the other thing is much more practical. The priests of Amun had been increasingly powerful, and his grandfather and his father before him had been trying to move power away from the Amun priests to the solar gods. And Aten was a form of a solar god. And so what Akhenaten did was just take this trajectory and push it much further. And so he probably was a bit of a religious visionary, as well as following the political and practical ideologies that his father and grandfather had put before him.
But then also, we were reading also that after his tenure as a pharaoh, things were reversed back to where were they, and I think the person who succeeded him was Tutankhamun, right? And he like reversed that. So do we know why that happened? And I mean, King Tut definitely is something that we want to cover with you, but that period seems to be interesting.
The period is a big mess, and we don't quite understand it. And you get two scholars together, and you'll all fight with 8 different theories. So it certainly, having this, the king say, I'm going to go to the city and I'm never going to leave, is a stupid idea, politically, I'm sure everyone would agree on that. And then the next point, of course, was if you alienate some of the most powerful priests and also the other priesthoods are damped down, it's not going to work in the long run because, of course, Egypt worked with the king and the temples linked together, so it wasn't a separation of church and state at all.
Yeah.
So I think that it was deemed most prudent by everyone. And remember, Tutankhamun, poor thing, was 9.5 when he became king.
Yeah.
So his advisors were taking a lot of the real decisions. So they probably thought that it would be politically a better bet to go back to the other system, but maybe, of course, also keep more power with the king and a little bit less with the priesthood, or divide it more equitably amongst the different priests, because the priests of Amun have been a threat to kingship.
So what do we know exactly, since we are talking already about King Tut, what do we know exactly about the circumstances surrounding his death? So I watched you saying several times that, or some of the documentaries were mentioning that the burial and the mummification was quite done in hastily, if we can say that, and that indeed shows in like his mummy compared to like his grandmother's mummy, which is much well preserved, right? So what do we know about this? And just if you can elaborate more on that.
Well, to make it very short, we have absolutely no idea. It's very strange because his mummification is not like anyone else's. I mean, we don't know what Akhenaten's mummification was like, or Horemheb's, or I's. So these are the people who flanked him. So we can't really say that much about that. The mummy, anyway, I won't get too detailed here. So the way it was carried out, though, does hint at some haste and the possibility that he was not in a place where there were professional embalmers, and so that it is possible that he was on campaign, and this is where it happened, and he hadn't taken along with him, or might have been hunting him. But if it were a hunt, he would be back within a day or two, bring the body back in the chariot. So it's more like he must have been on campaign. He died, and that's one mummification was not carried out in a proper way. Of course, the idea is that maybe there was a second message in mummification that the king was trying to show him really when he died. the manifestation of the god Pharaohs. Everyone who was dead, or the dead king, became Osiris, but maybe they were trying to be more literal to Tutankhamun, which is why he was mummified in this peculiar way. I think we're still struggling with the evidence.
We were lost you a little bit with
Connection
the
problems.
internet bandwidth.
Yeah.
So we
I did hear you were saying that he used to go on hunting campaigns. What were you saying talking about that, right? And then, or did I?
Yeah, hunting. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because if he was on campaign hunting, he would be brought back in a couple of days. So it's more likely that he was on a military maneuver at some distance away, and that's why they didn't have someone right there to look after his embalming properly, and they brought him back. And this is why maybe, or that someone tried to embalm him in a way that was not ideal, is one option. And the other option is that they were trying to do something special and different to identify him more with the god Osiris, god of the dead, because every living king was Horus and every dead king was Osiris. So maybe this was trying to be a bit more literal about this.
Okay, Salima, since we did start talking about mummies, I mean, you know, normally when people talk about mummies, they think of human mummies. But you are an expert in, you know, animal mummies and animal mummification. So could you tell us a bit more about this? Like, why did the ancient Egyptians used to mummify their animals, and what was the reason? Like, I did hear you many times in your several lectures and interviews. You did say that they used to mummify the animals since they represented some gods, you know, other animals that were slaughtered were mummified. They used to mummify the food even to put in the tomb so that the human would have enough food in the afterlife. But like, what was the main reason behind mummifying the animals?
Well, there are different kinds of animal mummies. Does either one of you have a pet?
No, not as far as I know. No.
No pets. Okay. Well, I mean, some of the ancient Egyptians loved their pets so much that when they died, they mummified them.
Okay. I know a few people that would want to do that these days.
Not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there are people. There are, in fact, funerary establishments that cater to such people and to pets. So that was one of the ancient Egyptian pets, mummies. Then, of course, you have food mummies, which is it's meat. You want to eat in the afterlife, and the Egyptians believed you can take it with you. And so they took those food mummies with them. And then the other kinds are sacred animals. The Egyptians believed that there were certain divinities that could manifest themselves in animal form. So parts of the spirit of the god could enter the body of a specially marked animal, and it would then, during this animal's lifetime, it would be treated like a god on earth, and then when it died, it would be mummified. The spirit of the god would enter into the new body, which of a different animal of the same species that the priest would recognize. Now, many people go, "Oh, this is so weird," but it's the same idea as the Dalai Lama, right? Different bodies, same spirit, migrating from body to body. And so those would be sacred animals. The largest kind of animal mummy type we have are offerings, votive offerings. Okay. So in a church, you go and light a candle. Sometimes when you go to a mashhad, you tie a prayer around the railings of a tomb. In ancient Egypt, you give a sculpture or a stela as an offering. So this was just a qurban, a blood sacrifice. Yeah. So you would offer a living example of the same species of the animal that the god was manifested as, and this animal would be sacrificed to the god and take your prayers and well to the god. So the god would then acknowledge this gift of the life and then return to you whatever you wanted from the god. And so this is the largest group of animal mummies that we have. And within this, sometimes we find things that look like a certain animal, but either don't contain it or contain parts of it. And that's something call these fake mummies, false mummies, pseudo mummies. But these are, the Egyptians believed in the power of the word. And you also know of the creation, you know, God spoke and it became, right? So if you say that something is whatever it's supposed to be, and you say the words over it and you carry out the ritual, maybe even if you only have a few feathers, it is supposed to be a whole ibis mummy given to the god Thoth. So those are basically the reasons why the Egyptians mummified animals and rolled it.
Interesting.
Certainly, like a lot of what Egyptians were doing, maybe with the animals and the mummies and their life in generally, was tremendously linked with afterlife and the idea of the afterlife. So, how can you just explain to us and to the audience more how the idea of afterlife shaped, you know, structures in Egypt, social life, and you know, people's day-to-day activity? That includes obviously, you know, massive structures like the pyramids that they've built.
Yes, well, that's not a small question you asked there. But the Egyptians did believe very strongly in an afterlife, but they also believed you could only achieve eternal existence if you had lived a moral life on this earth. So they did have basically the equivalent of the Ten Commandments by which to live. They had a very strong moral code and ethical code. I mean, obviously not everyone followed it. We have all kinds of court reports that talk about people, you know, lying, stealing, cheating, murdering, committing adultery, etc. So, you know, they were human. But they still have the same rules that the monotheistic religions of today have about what is considered acceptable behavior. And the promise there was also, if you do live a good life on this earth, you will live eternally. And for them, it was not just in a spiritual way, but also in a physical way, which is why they mummified bodies, so that your spirit could reanimate your corpse, and your corpse could, in a very physical way, in the afterworld, enjoy food and drink and sunshine. So they believed very much that you had to behave following these rules. And in fact, after you died, your spirit, your soul would go and be tested by different gods, and they would ask you questions, and you had to say, no, I did not lie, I did not steal, I did not cheat, I did not blah, 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 blah. And then, metaphorically or physically, the idea was that your heart would be weighed against the feather of truth. And it had to be in balance. And if it was in balance, if you lived a good moral life, then your soul would be taken and welcomed by the god Osiris into the afterworld, where you would go and live both as a spirit as well as a physical being who could enjoy everything that was delightful.
And is that why they left certain organs like the heart with the mummy to go to that? Yeah, and also they had the mask.
Yeah.
They wore the mask so that the gods would identify the person, so that they would be able to judge them. And certainly, like, that gave us a lot of what do you call like the Thoth's mask, which is like amazing.
I've got a question which I've been dying to ask.
I've
been dying to ask this. So I'm a civil engineer myself, okay? And obviously I always joke with my colleagues, like, you know, we've got all this fancy software right now, all this technology to build stuff, you know, bridges, highways, whatever. And, you know, every piece of work takes a lot of time, a lot of checking, etc. And I always tell my friends, guys, all this software that we've got, and we're taking all this time, all these calculations, etc. And they built the pyramids thousands of years ago. So what are the theories behind the buildings of the pyramids? Like, how did they build them? And in your opinion, which is the most, let's say, I don't know if that's the right word, but accurate theory?
Okay. Well, the pyramids themselves actually vary a lot in their architecture up through the 5th dynasty, so up till about 2200 BC. And then they become a bit more standardized. But I think that they're built basically, and if people are engineers such as yourself are always astonished, but if you've ever worked on an Egyptian excavation, you can see that what it was a lot of good sighting with astronomy, so you can get your orientation, and then you would sort of draw out your end, you would survey. The Egyptians were superb surveyors as well. And then you would just start to build, and they probably didn't even use that many formal plans. So cutting rocks, pulling things, using ramps, short ramps, longer ramps, and pulling things up slopes was really what had happened. The Egyptians used sledges made out of wood, as well as sort of rolling pieces of wood. And I have watched them move 4 tons worth of stone that's carved statuary. They tie rope around it, they put a few logs under it, and they all shout and pull as a team, and things pop out. And it is extraordinary to watch. So then people say, oh, but that's just moving the stone. How did they get it up there? And the thing is ramps, and we actually do have evidence for several ramps. So I think that is not a strange theory. One of the problems, of course, people say is, oh, it must have, the pyramid is this high, so the ramp must have started several kilometers away. But I think if they built a little bit, you could have part of the ramp built within, you have a platform when you pull it onto the platform. Yeah. I'm not explaining this very well because I'm not an engineer. And there was a certain amount of the ramp going around the pyramid, so you didn't have to start 3 kilometers away to drag a bit of stone. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh no, that's perfect. That's perfect.
There's a lot of things that people, think how the pyramids were built, and a lot of theories, some of which are outlandish, of course. But one thing that I recently discovered is we all have this stereotypical image of how the pyramids were built. Let's say, Great Pyramid of Giza, Khufu's pyramid was slaves and this is the stereotype. And a crazy king, just I want to build a pyramid because I'm the most powerful god / human in the world. But there's a lot of evidence that says that this was a national project that Egyptians participated in, and workers were you can comment more on the conditions that they lived in, but certainly they had some privileges. Level. They lived not like slaves, if what the evidence tells us. So where do you think that came from, and what do you know as someone who was on the ground that refutes this mainstream ideas?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that makes me so cross. This is from various religious texts where people say that the pharaoh made slaves build the pyramids. The pyramids were not made by slaves. We actually have evidence of people being paid to work on the pyramids. We have their barracks. We have some of the bread making facilities, the bread, the beer, the dried fish, the meats that they all ate. Some of them had been hurt. They were attended to by doctors, some of them more successfully than others. So we really do know that this was not slavery. There might have been slaves involved who were prisoners of war, who were going to be working on the quarries, and they were the ones quarrying the stone.
Right. Okay.
And doing a lot of the hard labor in the quarries. But this was, as far as we can tell, the pyramids were made as a national project, team building in modern parlance, and also it was something that was being given as a gift to all of Egypt and to the gods. So it was making Egypt behave well with the god king, as well as the gods who were up in the skies. It also gave people guaranteed employment and food and drink, with some that they could, send back to their families. And this was particularly important because for 4 months of the year, at least, Egypt's agricultural land were under inundation. So farmers couldn't do very much because, of course, there was the flood. Yeah. So this gave them an opportunity to have something to do. It also was a way for them, instead of having to pay taxes, they could do corvée labor instead of tax. Plus, instead of going for 4 months and going down to the pub, as it were, and sitting there and becoming bad-tempered and getting angry with the king or the priest or the government or the this gave them something to do so that you didn't have a lot of idle population stirring up trouble or fighting with one another. So the pyramids worked for Egypt in an economical as well as political and nationalistic way on many levels.
So you did talk about food, and I do want to highlight on this. Like, what sort of information do we have about the, let's say, the food that the ancient Egyptians used to consume? And like, obviously, you are what you eat, right? So, like, depending on what they used to eat, what were the social classes, let's say, associated with each? So, whoever eated, let's say, cattle or meat, what social status were they? And let's say, I do assume the lower classes were eating just bread or something. Like, could you just give us more information about that?
Of course. Cattle was the highest level of food, and that would be the king and his court and priests in the temple.
Okay.
But the people who worked for the king, building the pyramid, also got meat rations. So they would probably eat more meat while they were working for the king than they did the rest of the year. So also because, temples would do regular daily sacrifice of cattle and sheep and goat and poultry, they couldn't finish all of this. So this would be then given to people who were dependents and even sold. And we have some butcher's accounts because a priest said, I have this excess that I have been paid, so I'm going to sell it to you for such and such. And so you can see this whole economy moving on through the temple and what they did. So cows up there, kings, courtiers, high elite priests, anyone who's in the upper levels, sheep and goat moving down, pigs and some sheep and goat for the lower levels, poultry and fish, sort of all the way across the board, depending on where you were and what season. So if you're in the oases, you're not going to get that much fish, but you might get some birds, especially seasonally. Whereas if you live in the Nile Valley or if you're in the Delta, you have a lot of birds, a lot of fish, so you don't have to worry so much. And of course, bread, beer, wine for the more elite.
Sorry, did you say beer?
Later on,
they drank
Yeah.
beer.
Beer, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they were some of the first people to make beer. It wasn't like modern beer, which is much stronger, and it was probably sometimes much safer to drink than the water, depending on the time of year. And it gave them nourishment because it's basically made with bread. So bread, beer, and onions were very popular. But they had, garlic for flavoring. They had coriander. They had cumin, salt, of course, and a lot of vegetables. So different kinds of lettuce, cucumbers, zucchini type things, kosa, things like that. Grapes, pomegranates later on. They brought in peaches eventually. So you have a lot of, and the diet changed over time. You have chickpeas, you have lentils, and as they had contact with more and more people, the kind of plants particularly, and diversified. And then, finally, by the 4th century BC, we start getting chickens. Before that, we didn't really have chickens here. So it was, again, that was a great diversity. And some people say, the ancient Egyptians didn't eat pigs, but they did. They're cheap, quick source of food, and they don't require that much feeding, and especially if you're in the Delta, it's wet, so they flourish there, and that's something that the poorer people can keep.
Like a lot of the things that we've mentioning about it being maybe more equitable than someone would originally think in terms of people not being slaves to begin with and having jobs when they don't have land to farm and in a dry season. There's a lot of evidence as well that there's like upward mobility in the social structure, or although there is a structure, but a lot of people who were like, I don't know what's the term, but started as like maybe a project manager on a pyramid. They ended up being someone, maybe established dynasties. So like, what are the factors that enabled someone from like a poor family in Egypt or a modest one to climb up the ladder and become something more powerful in the social structure?
I don't wish to paint too rosy a picture about ancient Egypt because there were slaves. Generally, often much better treated than anywhere else in the ancient world, I have to say. And there was a huge difference between the king and the peasant, but certainly it was much easier being a peasant in ancient Egypt than it was being a felah under the Ottomans, I have to say.
Wow.
So I think because there was a smaller population and there was a more paternalistic view. So, as I was saying, there is social mobility, especially through the military, same as it is now. Even foreigners, if they had been acculturated, could rise and gain some kind of position and power. I'm not saying it was all equitable or rosy, but it wasn't as brutal as it was in many other Asian cultures. I would like to point out that women had far more rights in the world. This persisted even through the Greek period, the Ptolemaic reign. It was only in the Roman period when Egyptian women lost a lot of their rights and liberties. So in ancient Egypt, women had much more economic as well as social as well as political power than anywhere else in the ancient world. I would say if I were to choose, apart from my bias, living in and I think that England was probably the best one, and that in such a hierarchical society, there was still more flexibility, and to some extent, there was space for merit.
We were discussing just before the episode or filming or the call that there's a lot of there's a lot of different dynasties in Egypt.
Yeah.
And we know, like, okay, the pyramids were built around maybe 4th or 5th dynasty, and a lot of things happened in between, like intermediate periods or what have you. So what do you think was like the highest level of
Prosperous,
the highest level of prosperity in Egypt, and under what are the conditions that govern that?
Well, I recommend my book, Ancient Egypt, an Introduction. But also, we do have, I would say that during each kingdom, we reach a peak. The intermediate periods were not all terrible, but they weren't as consistently unified and strong. So productivity on a national scale was greatly diminished, whereas on a regional scale, it might have peaked much more, in fact. But for example, and we have pyramids being built throughout the Old and Middle Kingdoms for royalty. But you can say that the 4th dynasty was extraordinary for its building. The 5th dynasty more so for trade as well as local construction. The Middle Kingdom, the 12th dynasty, again, we have conquests of Nubia, a lot of alliances with the Near East. And the New Kingdom, of course, the 19th dynasties are the golden days in terms of empire, where Egypt, like in the 1950s, controlled or was allied. I mean, Syria was part of Egypt, and large parts of, which is not in the 1950s, of course, large parts of Nubia as well were under Egyptian control. So you could say that in about 1400, 1450 BC, Egypt had its largest area of control.
Another thing that, you could say, yes, of course, like as you said, like 18th and 19th dynasties had a lot of control, but then like their tombs and burial sites were not as big and great as the 4th dynasties. Like they didn't build the pyramids, you had the Valley of Kings. So what was the transition that pharaohs or ancient Egyptians said, we should stop doing this, because I mean it's very beautiful and was successful at doing it a long time ago?
The religious focus shifted as well as the economic focus, because instead of having pyramids, the kings had huge mortuary temples. So it was of how you're buried and what your religious focus was. Same time, in the old pyramids, especially in the 4th dynasty, a bit. After doing more, we're going to make these canals. We're going to do these agricultural things. We're going to do a whole network of canals through the desert. So you can see that the people were then being moved. Your labor force was being used and deployed for something else. So the king was still important and the tomb was important, but it wasn't quite the same kind of grandeur. And also, they didn't want it robbed, particularly in the New Kingdom, which is why you have again a separation between where the burial took place and where the cult of the king was celebrated, which was in these massive temples.
I do have a sort of a personal question, let's say. Howard Carter in November 1922, he discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun. I can only say it in Arabic. Anyways, so I'm sure, we both can imagine how happy he was. If I gave you the option to discover one thing, you can discover one thing which is major, what would it be? Like, what is your dream in this thing?
That's very difficult. That's very difficult. I think I probably would think that the nicest thing to find would be deposits of texts.
Okay.
Which is a funny thing to say for someone who doesn't really do philology.
We were expecting more gold and like big tombs. And like
No, I think a cache of amazing texts that tell us about either daily life or temple ritual or about a part of history. Or the other thing would be like the new find at Malkata North, finding a whole city or part of a city with rubbish dumps, with texts and all of that. I think that would be the coolest thing, because that would tell us the most and is the most varied and exciting kind of find. So I think that finding a part of a once living city with a big rubbish heap would be great.
Fair enough.
The emphasis on like the systems and like the sewage systems and rubbish and how they did their daily life would certainly tells you a lot how they lived. Maybe quickly change of. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to change the topic, and we've recently seen like the transport of like 22 mummies to the new Grand Egyptian Museum, and just wanna ask you more about the significance of having a new museum to Egypt nowadays, and how would that affect the country and what you're doing. And we've read as well that a lot of King Tut's entire treasure is going to be for the first time in history in the same place after its discovery. So what's the significance of that for Egypt these days?
I think the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities is working on these projects in the hope of bringing more tourists to Egypt, so that, as you know, a large percentage of Egypt's economy is based on tourism. So the museum is a way of objects in question to bring more tourists to Egypt, provide more jobs for Egyptians by the diversification of museum types.
I didn't get that, but I get the summary that creating more jobs by building something big, which sounds like current Egyptians have similar economic policies than ancient Egyptians in terms of building something and get people some jobs to do that. So can you tell us maybe? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe finally, just what do you think are parts of history or like Egyptology that are still undiscovered? You've mentioned, the sewage systems and the rubbish, but what are the things that would you'd say we're keen to discover and know more about? Yeah,
they did say. I think I heard you once say like more than 70% has not been discovered yet, right?
Yeah.
Has not been that. I mean, we are missing the tombs of kings, we're missing the tombs of queens. It would be wonderful to find out more details about how the ancient Egyptians lived, understand more about their religious practices, because what we have, and we are constantly creating links between them, forging, associating, creating a narrative. And I think we need more evidence up to fill that narrative out even more, to flesh it out and get a better understanding of who the ancient Egyptians were, what they believed, and indeed parts of their history. King Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, we barely know anything about.
Yeah, this only tiny statue, right?
Recently, a French team led by Dr. Pierre Palais found this wonderful. We were working on the Red Sea coast and found in a harbour. We also found pieces.
Salima, I have to interrupt you again.
Belonging to Gotcha.
We're losing you in the end. We're losing you in the end. That's the problem.
Okay. So why don't we just say that I'm hoping that we will find more things that will tell us about the daily life and fill in some of the details. So we have the big monuments, and now we need more of the little stuff to tell us about who the ancient Egyptians were and what they believed.
Okay, before we lose you, because I need to say this. When we do visit Egypt, both of us, you will take us touring around, won't you?
Yeah.
No. I'll make you come with my student.
I'll be happy to. That's fine. Okay.
Yeah, it's second best. Why not?
Yeah.
You're not Morgan Freeman, so
no.
You're not
I was hoping, we go for
Okay.
lunch, we have a nice tour, but yeah, fair enough.
Oh, we can go for lunch.
Yeah,
we go for lunch.
But I'm not taking you through 100 miles of country.
No,
that's fine. That's
Just-
fine.
Several places,
That's okay.
especially to the museums in Cairo, which are fabulous.
Absolutely.
So
sure.
I welcome you. I will take you to the museum. Ala tool.
Shukran. It would be our pleasure for sure.
We'll hold you to that word, Salima. Yeah.
He's serious. So.
It's deal. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your time. This was insightful, and there were some connection problems, so we hope with the editing that would look much better. But yeah, we certainly have a lot of things that we've learned today, and hopefully people watching us as well have learned anything.
I mean, as always, thank you so much for the time. We did learn a lot, and hopefully we do this again. Hopefully maybe next time with a better connection. And why not do it in front of the pyramid, right?
Yeah. Wow. Well,
That's a
that
good
would
idea.
be good.
We'll book
Now
it.
that would
We'll
be
book it.
fun.
Thank you.
When you come and visit, that's what we'll do.
Sure.
Absolutely. Shukran, Salima.
Afwan, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Ma salama.
مع السلامة. الله يسلمك. Bye. Very good. I just hope that
I know.
some of the internet.
I wasn't willing to interrupt her while she was talking.
Yeah,
but
I know.
We learned a lot. I mean,
learned a
it's
lot.
too much to process, and
No, yeah.
I don't know
yeah.
how many minutes it was, but let's hope next time we do it face to face.
No, certainly. We'll just be in touch with her and tell
Yeah.
her maybe we can do it again. But certainly this was our first English episode.
Yeah. I mean, you saw me struggle with Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun.
I finally said it. There you go.
I don't know how to say it in English.
Yeah.
I don't know. Tutankhamun.
Tutankhamun,
I mean,
something like that.
but that has to be the best name of a king in history.
Oh, absolutely.
That has to be the best name. Wanted to maybe ask her more about that and
Yeah.
about some of the treasures that they found. But maybe the next time we'll have the opportunity to
Oh
do
yeah,
so.
we're gonna do it.
And hopefully whoever is watching us for the first time in English, this is not the usual.
Normally we're much more. How to say this? I mean, for the guys who know me, you know how I am, and I assume by now you know how Musa is, very relaxed, always chill. So because it was in English, especially with the connection.
we did well. We did
we
well.
always do well. Come on. But because of the connections, we had some problems, and that's it.
Salima is certainly the best when it comes to these topics, and hopefully we'll always have a diversified list of experts and always try to bring you the best in their respective fields. So I know you always close it, so
I'll do the honor.
Yeah, you always do it much better than I do, so go ahead.
So we do want to thank you so much for your time. We hope that you enjoyed it, so please do give us a like, subscribe, follow us on social media. I mean, please comment on the video as well. If you want us to have different topics, if you have some specific topics, topics in mind, maybe we can contact some experts. We are doing our best, so we're still in the beginning.
We both have other commitments in terms of jobs and studying, so we'll try to get you this bi-weekly podcast, and hopefully you'll enjoy it when you watch it. So thanks a lot, everyone, and yeah,
We'll see you soon.
see
in
you
2
soon.
weeks. In
2 weeks. Have a good day. Bye.
Cheers.
Guys, thanks so much for watching. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on social media. We shall see you next week. Salam.